will be a recording available and you will get the slides afterwards. And there will be a Q&A. So I think I will have 30-40 minutes of talk. Whenever you have a question, please just type it to the chat and we will try to answer as many as possible. So stay active and type in the chat. I can have a nice conversation. Okay, so today's topic, it's the next generation capability map. So the question is, what went wrong with capability maps in our opinion? So if you Google capability maps, you can do it right now. You will find something like this. And that's coming purely out of business architecture communities. So it's a instrument driven by business architecture communities, architects maybe, and business people and management and business schools are not that connected to this concept yet. So we must be aware that business capabilities as they are today are driven by kind of an engineering IT-centered view. And there are some bodies of knowledge out there. You might know them. So there are some bigger communities. And I think 10 or 15 years ago, they started to have this movement around business capabilities. And still, even after decades, you won't find really practical design patterns. So when you look at the capability maps that are out there, it seems to be that there is no common way of modeling them. And what makes a good capability model? We will talk about that. What does it mean to have a good out there? So there's only a few practical design patterns, and we want to change this with Intersection Group. So in end of this year, we will release a toolkit, and there you will find also some modeling pattern that are collected by our community of the Intersection Group. And if you look at what you find in Google, it can be said that quite often they are ugly. So if you just look at the colors and the alignment and the font size and so on, most, I would say 95% or so, it's not a good idea to present it to the boardroom because all this alignment stuff and so on. And from some of those reasons, we must be aware that they are not very present outside the architecture communities. They are an instrument driven by business architects, enterprise architects. They are meant to be a means for business IT alignment. Yeah, and there are some guidance in Bespoke and in Toga, for example. But it hasn't made it to the other side, to the business people, to the people that went to business schools. It's not there. It's in business architecture and enterprise architecture communities. And we want to change that. With Intersection Group for us, in our model, it's a really important instrument. And we will talk about this shortly, why this is such an important and maybe the center of gravity of the architecture facet we have. So wouldn't it be lovely? So this is the reframing. Yeah, wouldn't it be lovely to have a tool to design adaptive organizations? And I hope many of you have read this really brilliant book, Design for Digital, Jeannie Ross. It's well known in the enterprise architect space and in other spaces. And what they do, they coin a term reusable business components. And I had the chance to discuss with her and with Martin Mocker. He's also part of our association. He's a co-author. And I asked him, Martin, what do you mean by reusable business components? Are those processes? Are those capabilities? Are those, I don't know. And they didn't give a clear answer. So it's not in the book. They use the term reusable business components. And that's interesting because in her first book in 2006, Jeannie Ross, Enterprise Architecture as a Strategy, she used the term business process. So there seems to be a change in their thinking from business processes to business components, while still they did not use the term capabilities. But with our work, we want to position capabilities as the perfect tool to design adaptive organizations. The relation to organizational design is enormous. But it's not there. So if people doing organization design are typically very different from business architects. Organizations are defined in hidden circles with the CEOs and with management and some external consultancies. Business architects are not that present when it comes to restructuring typically. But capabilities would be the perfect tool to design adaptive organizations. We will talk about that. And wouldn't it be a good idea to have a tool to connect co-designers? So if you followed some of our webinars, you must know that we are really keen to connect all these designing disciplines that are present in enterprises today. So think of it as there are service designers. And what they do, they design services. They are process managers. So the people have been around for decades, 3-4 decades, process managers. They define some processes. And then there are some software architects. Maybe they do domain-driven design or design some modules or logical application structure, something like that. And then there's the organization designer. And then there's the CEO, maybe sitting on top of the elephant. And all of these people co-design this enterprise. We must be aware that there's not the single big one architect out there, business architect. So there are many people. Yeah, and so there is a high demand to connect these people. They must speak a similar language. And with capability maps, if you create them in a certain way, if you make them beautiful, my experience is that it's a good instrument to connect these co-designers. That's how we want to position capabilities via a stunning user experience. So that's this iPhone metaphor. So with all we do with Intersection Group, we have a high quality standard for beauty and user experience, because the only way to pull in people to a co-design and to a co-architecting of the enterprise is beauty, and having a user experience, having clear maps, simple maps, not in robot-like language. So we must have really a beautiful capability map. And we will talk about this later, what this could mean maybe, how to get this clarity. And I rarely ever see capability maps that are clear and beautiful. Usually they are overloaded and with everything is called management and huge and not well known at the business side. We must get rid of this. We must pull them in. They must say, a CEO, for example, wow, that's a cool tool. I can have it on my iPhone. That's us. Yeah, that's my understanding. That's the idea, and we must get closer to beauty. To foster a shared understanding, yeah, and I like this metaphor of the 6 blind men of the elephant. So with capability maps, and it's also in other bodies of knowledge, you want to define naming conventions. So it's really important how you call the stuff. And once you manage to do that, so if you manage to bring the elephant to the boardroom, and that's the enterprise, and somebody can touch it almost, well, it's still a map, yeah, and then he say, okay, that's the eye, and that's the tooth, and that's the trunk, and that's the leg, yeah. And for strategic reasons, we must extend and strengthen the leg maybe a bit so the elephant can run faster. So that could be a strategic goal for this enterprise. And magic happens. So once you have established a map that is shared across all these disciplines, you enable them to co-design. And that's a problem I see in almost any company I've seen, that you have these designing disciplines and they are not well connected together. They speak a different language. Capability maps and this elephant are a good tool to do that. So that's also one of the biggest goals we want to connect those disciplines. Yeah, and if you're in this business architecture space, this from strategy to execution, that is a buzzword, and we know that many companies struggle with this topic and how to connect strategy. And when you talk to the C2 executives, they are quite often frustrated and say, well, yeah, we have a cool strategy, but it never comes down to earth in execution. That's a big topic. And yes, capabilities are a tool to do that, because they can bridge, if it's used in the implementation side and in the strategy side, it's the perfect means to connect those worlds. And that's also important for us. So now you know where we want to go with capability maps. Yeah, we want to position it as a tool for organization design. We want to seamlessly connect the process of designing IT. So that's in the bespoke and the bodies of knowledge. That's closer how we design our applications processes. but we must connect it with organization design. How do we structure our teams and so on? And that's what we want to do with this reframing. And that's the remainder of my talk for the remaining 20 or 25 minutes. So let's start with a definition. And there are several out there. Yeah, the bodies of knowledge have one, Gartner, there is one. But I really like most the definition Bernard Gagnon and Pierre Hadaya give, and they're from Canada. And for me, this is the best book on business architecture I've read so far. It's really concise, only 150 pages. They did a lot of research. Bernard is also a member in our association, so we have a cooperation. Probably we will come up with a paper about the topic of this webinar soon. And what they say, business capability is a set of resources that by working together gives the organization the ability to purposefully produce a particular business output. So that's quite dense. Yeah. So let's have a look what this means. A set of resources. So think of capabilities as a basket, a boundary, and in this boundary, you design how people and machines and maybe raw material and buildings and information and processes. So these are all resources in there. And how do they work together to produce a certain output? And they don't use outcome. Yeah, there's a big difference. Output is a concrete, tangible thing. So it can be a product and it can be an intermediary result. So you have a capability and it has some outputs. So for example, a company has the capability for human resource management, and they have the output to hire people. That's a concrete output. Yeah? Wolfgang Goebel is hired. That's an output. Not an outcome. So so there we are a bit different from other bodies of knowledge. Let's say it's about outcomes, but maybe that's too far away and too philosophic. Purposefully produce. With purpose, we won't talk much about purpose today. This is part of other webinars. Purpose for us is the green facet. So it's about how to connect this architecture, this structuring, this set of resources, the capability to the higher purpose, to the vision, to the mission, to the identity, to the story, and so on, all of this stuff. There's some work in progress in the intersection group, and we will have some webinars shortly about this topic, what this purpose means. Today, we won't talk much about this, but for now, when you think about capabilities, you have these boxes in boxes, and this is an example capability map. So this is from a railway company. It's derived from a real world example. I used to work for Austrian Railways for some times, and it's quite close what they had. And what we did, for example, what they are doing, they maintain the infrastructure. So they build stations, they build trains, they maintain trains, the tracks, they plan, and of course they need to do some logistics and material, and they have machines. So you need to do resource management and planning. That's a capability. And when you look at this map, it's quite straightforward. Yeah, and it's quite easy to understand. I mean, yes, of course, a railway company needs to build and maintain the infrastructure. And yes, of course, you need to build and maintain stations and tracks and so on. That's got pretty straightforward, but it was hard work to design that stuff for some reasons I will explain shortly. So yes, also in our idea of capabilities, a capability map is a hierarchy. And it's a hierarchy of capabilities grouped by some categories. So for example, in this capability map, I use customer facing. So these are capabilities that have direct contact to the customers. For example, you sell some routes to a railway company, or you do some freight terminal services if there's a cargo company that wants to transport some material across your railways, across your rails, and so on. And then you have the train operations, and they operate power plants, they trade energy, they optimize capacities, and so on. So that's you need to manage where the train, you manage the deflections and so on. And of course, you have this infrastructure management, and that's pretty straightforward, and that seems pretty easy. But if you go deeper, there are a lot of design challenges you must tackle, and we will dive into this in a few seconds. Assemble resources to create an output. So that's exactly the definition of Bernard and Pierre in their book. So there's a boundary. You can say it's a system in systems thinking. There's a boundary, and you have some people with certain skills. You have IT buildings, machines. That's a capability, and the product or another output is that's straightforward. I mean, that's really easy to understand. That's the easy part. And so one example I have had is billing. Yeah, so if some railway company travels across the railways of this intersection railways, of course they need to get a bill. Yeah, and they get charged for each kilometer they travel across the railways. And in that case, you have maybe a person, a billing officer, you have maybe a SAP system to produce the bill, you have an office building, and you have the route that is traveled. That's an information. You must have the information about from where to where this train has traveled. And you call this billing, and the result is a bill. That's easy. That's still pretty straightforward. But the $1,000,000 question, and I think it's pretty much unanswered in many of this body of knowledge, is how to design it, how to design this boundary. Why do we have billing as a capability? Why didn't we decompose it differently? Why is it? And with intersection group, what we want to come up with, we want to have capabilities as modular business components. Jeannie Ross talks about in Design for this Digital. So when you're an architect, you know the concept of cohesion and loose coupling. It's in software architecture. It's a big concept, right? You have separation of concerns, all this technological blah. Yeah, I've learned at university. I'm also a techie by education. So you strive for highest possible cohesion. That means together what belongs together. So because you want to have a lot of communication inside this boundary and only little communication between these components. Then you have this loose coupling. Then you have interfaces that are simple. And if you have loose coupling, that's much better for your adaptivity. And that's a concept invented in software architecture. And I was quite fascinated when I came up with the conclusion that with capability and positioning them as reusable business components, it's exactly the same concept. Yeah, it's just not there. So organization designers are not familiar because that's all techie. Yeah, but at the end, it's pretty straightforward. So what does it mean to design for business adaptivity? Avoid redundancy and strive for highest possible cohesion. So in cohesion, it's from the 70s, is the degree to which the elements inside a component belong together for some unifying purpose. They belong together. So, but how do I find things that belong together? And that's that's a bit tricky. Which resource as a cohesion criterion? So if you say belongs together, for example, there are bodies of knowledge that says you always group capabilities around information. For example, you have claim management. So the claim, if you're an insurance company, it's an information object, or contract management, or customer relationship management. So there are quite clear guidelines that say always structure capabilities around information assets. And we think if we want to bring it back to organizational design, that's simply wrong. It simply does not work because then you get IT components and you don't get business components because it's all about information. But belonging together cannot be only defined by uses the same information or creates the same information. There are other aspects, right? Why not group it together by people? Put together people with a similar skill. Why not group it together by buildings? And that's in organization design quite often. So if you are a bank and the branch of the bank, so that's a building. So you have a location somewhere in the countryside, and there are 30 people working in a branch of your bank. Typically, they perform similar tasks and that they are an organizational unit, and they also coin the design of capabilities. They sell something out there. Or machines in Austrian Railways. We had groups of people that were related around big machines. Sometimes they need huge machines to maintain the tracks and the travel around them. I don't know. There's a lot going on. And of course, they had kept the capability to operate this machine. So in that case, the machine was the criteria, and so on. So to go a bit deeper into the railway example here, what can you use as this criteria? In that example, you have physical assets. For example, this railway company has the capability to build and maintain stations, to build and maintain tracks, to build and maintain power lines, to build and maintain power plants. And that's what they did. And that was also how they were organized. And in that case, the capability structure and the organizational structure was driven by physical assets, because they made the decision that building and maintaining a station is very different from building and maintaining power lines, for example. If you build a station, you need a mason and the big companies and all this stuff you need for building management. If you build power lines, you need electricians and transformators, and it's a totally different world. So the reason why they put it in different capabilities is because building stations and building power lines is a very different thing. So that's one way to decompose capabilities. Customer facing. Quite often you have the capabilities, for example, these freight terminal services. What happens in this railroad is that there is a truck coming from the logistics company, and he brings some freight to the freight terminal, and then you load it from the truck to the train. And that's a service. And that's a customer-facing service. And that's a capability. It's typically a good idea to look at your touch points and find related tasks that are close to your customer-facing capabilities. That can also be a criteria. And then you can have similar skills, similar tasks, processes, for example. If you have on the right side research and development, for example, innovation. Many people have the research and development, and you need highly skilled people to do that. You need experts and highly skilled people that are able to do that research and development. And for those capabilities, assets are not that important. It's about people's skill and their thinking and their competencies. So in that case, your criteria might be similar skills or similar tasks, and you can decompose it. And I have several other examples for that. So for now, the message here is we believe it's utterly wrong to say capabilities should always be have a boundary around information. Capabilities should have a boundary around what leads to highest cohesion, what belongs together most. And these are design decisions made by business people, and we should follow them. And then a few words about capability categories. If you look out there, you will find not a lot of standards how to structure capability maps. Some people start with strategic management, core, and support capabilities, for example. So you have these categories. Strategy, management is typical vision, strategy, and executive management on top. And then you have produce something, operate the train, so these core processes. And then you have the support, and that support is not a bad idea. But not everybody does it that way. Some people do it totally different. But in our experience, it's very important how you design these categories. And in the current draft of the intersection toolkit, we have 4 categories, but we have a lot of ongoing discussions. So next year, probably we will come up with a paper and some discussions in what case to use what categories. There are some patterns, I'm sure there are. But for now, what we use is customer facing. So focus the attention of the people designing capabilities on the customer. So these are the capabilities where you can get in touch with customers, sales, customer services, and so on. Operational, that comes from process management. You have these core processes. So operational capabilities are where we create the products, where we do the manufacturing, the warehousing, where we manage the claims in an insurance company. So these are the typical core processes. That's a good idea. And what we also think is a good idea to have this shared capabilities. We don't want to call them support anymore. In the process management, you have the support processes, support capabilities, like human resources is typically support. And we don't think it's support. It's more, for us, more important is sharing and reuse. So that's the reason why we want to go with shared capabilities rather than support, because they are also important. And you have this typical marketing, legal, human resource, accounting. We all know that's shared. It's quite easy to find in companies. And typically, those capabilities are also departments. So you also see the similarity between capability design and organizational design here. And then we have this category, and that's under high discussion, change versus run capability. That's driven by a paper written by, I think it's a Stanford professor called Thiese in the 2007. He coined the term dynamic capabilities, means those are capabilities that change the operational one. So that's innovation. How do we change the business? Research, for example, doing enterprise design, creating a strategy and vision. And in his paper, Thiese says that's really important to separate them. It could lead to the fact that you have several organizational units, but that's not his point. He just says that capabilities, operationals and shared, are very different from change capabilities. And that's important to focus your attention. And so the big question here is, why is it important to have these categories? Because you focus the attention, and it's really important to focus the attention of management to categories. Because if you, for example, if you would have a category change capabilities and operational, then you can measure them, and then you can say, how much do we invest in change, in the change capabilities, in research? How much do we invest in operations? How much do we invest in our customer facing? And we will see in a webinar in 2 weeks from now, there will be a webinar where we will connect capabilities with management. So capability-based planning, strategy, capability-based strategy, and that stuff. And there we will discuss that capabilities are very powerful as a management instrument. But if you have flaws in your categories, you have flaws in what you measure and how you aggregate and how you make decisions. And for now, but it's still under discussion, we as Intersection Group say, okay, it makes sense to have a category customer facing, operational, shared. So what do we reuse and change? But a lot of discussion still going on. And then we have this beauty thing. I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar. What does it mean? The only way, and we all enterprise architects typically complain that they are not connected with business, and what's our role, and nobody understands our models, and we create Archimate, and I don't know, we have an enterprise architecture tool, and there we have capability maps, but it rarely ever lives outside the small enterprise architecture group. That's the reality. Most tool vendors I've spoken with say, well, we have the problem that our tools, we have only 20 clients installed, because that's the enterprise architecture departments, but we want to come to the business side and they never connect to the tools. Maybe it's not a question of tools, maybe it's more a question of beauty of the maps, because we believe that beauty is the glue that has the ability to bridge disciplines. And we as engineers, I'm an engineer, we haven't learned much about beauty. We have learned much about precision and rigor and being precise. We are so clever and analytic thinkers, but think of beauty, right? And what does it mean? Use their language versus semantic rigor. For example, there are bodies of knowledge that propose to have always a noun and a verb. For example, manage human resources. Some say, no, it must be called human resource management. We don't care that much. I mean, I know where it's coming from this analytic mindset, and we want to have naming convention. Yeah, we need it. But if the term, and if you have a department already in your company and the department is called HR, human resources, it makes no sense to have a box and write inside manage human resources, because then the bridge between the people is huge, because they need to translate, this enterprise architect, yeah, it's called manage human resources. Yes, but we call it HR, and you have this language problem. And in doubt, if you're in doubt, our hint is always use their language and live with flaws in the precision. Language is never precise, and there's language that is common and has emerged over decades. It's not a good idea to have a model and say, no, I'm a business architect, you must call it human resource management. It's not HR. Will never work. So that's not a good idea. Focus on the essence. I've seen capability models with hundreds of boxes, 5 layers, nobody reads it. Yeah. So, but when I model it, typically I have maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 level 1, 20, 10 or 20, level 2, 50 or 75 level 3 capabilities. So that's for a big company. That's maybe not for General Electric because they're huge, but that's for typical railway in the railway company, for example. So if you have a complex company, so that's some guidelines. Use colors and icons. In these pictures, we have not used icons yet, but we think about it because all that helps to make it tangible is a good idea. I've seen people using 3D graphics. It's some effort to do that. So if you have a graphic designer, use icons. That's really powerful. So in this example, we also haven't done it because we need to invest some money into a designer. But use colors, make it a bit shady and a bit blue, maybe whatever color you want. Alignment of boxes. I cannot say how many capability maps I've seen where the rows were not aligned. Yeah, and then you have this, and then you have a capability that is that way. And that's tougher than it seems. Yeah, because sometimes and lay out it 16:9, for example. It should fit on a PowerPoint, and there's a lot of work to find the best alignment of boxes, but it's possible and you must do it. Because if you go to the boardroom and you present to them a capability map, maybe generated out of a tool, and it's not well layouted, I guarantee that the CEO won't listen because if it's ugly, even if it's correct, they won't listen to you. So please take your time. And it's really, I think this was 2 hours of time, the layout you see, but you have all the columns are aligned, all the rows are aligned, and it takes some time to do that. Make products visible. I've seen capability maps and I was unable to say, is this an insurance company? Is this a bank? Is this Google? Is this electricity? I don't know what it is because the model was so generic. They had something like planning, doing, building, measuring, so very generic. So making product visible, and that is typically in these operational capabilities. So group your capabilities around the major product groups, of course. Yeah. So if you're a bank, you might have Giro and loan and investment paper, for example. These are the main product categories. And I want to see them in the capability map. I've not ever seen it. So connect everybody by beauty as and thanks for this comment, Sophos. Yes, beauty is the key. We believe it. And if you Google what's out there in capability maps, it's far from beautiful. And capability categories, it's about focusing. But isn't that all organization design? For 2 years, I've read a lot about capability modeling, the whole bespoke and all the literature, and I was really frustrated from what's out there. And I always, in my assignments, I have the tension between my capability structure. You have human resource and billing and so, and that's so similar to the org units, organizational units, and team. So, but isn't that all organization design? And some months ago, I found this gem out there. So this is a book by Henry Mintzberg, The Structuring of Organization. It's written in 79. He's 82 years, a professor in Canada wrote it, and he said this is his masterpiece, and it is his masterpiece because he answers exactly the same discussion, but for organizational units. For example, what he says is, basis for grouping by knowledge and skill, grouping by work process or function. And if you read it there, he has some criteria. In what cases is it better to have an organizational boundary around processes or around functions or around outputs? So 40 years ago, he already had the vision of this product-driven organization. So it's also a good idea to form a capability or an organizational unit around products. So that's the fad of today, right? From processes to products, and we must create the product, the value streams. Yippee! Yeah, that's a way to organize, but it's only one way, and that's maybe also an important statement. If you read this book, it's a bit hard to buy, but it's possible. it's all there, and it's so much more differentiated to what you have in capability modeling. And then I'm used a lot around, well, what is the difference between, because there are people. I mean, if you are an architect, you structure capabilities by analytical things. And then I found a section in there when he says it's also about social fit. So cohesion around social criteria means if you group a capability or an organizational unit, only around the machine or because it belongs together, because they are similar business tasks, it doesn't help when the community, the people, the head of the department, for example, is unable to communicate with a neighboring discipline, with a neighboring department. So there are some social factors. Typically, if you look at organizations, they are always dysfunctional. I've never found an organization that I would have designed in that way, because redundant tasks, you've seen that, yeah, and organizational units that are a basket of stuff that does not belong together. And the reason for that is typically corporate politics. Yeah, and social stuff and people that don't talk to each other. So I think the difference between org design and this analytical capabilities stuff, there's a lot of human factors to be considered. Yeah, but the message here is, if you don't connect your capability map with the organization, you are not connected to the business side. So maybe this is the most important slide. I think that capability maps, if you use them as what's in prevalent bodies of knowledge, they quite often talk about business IT alignment, right? And you have the business and you have the IT and then you have the capability maps. And we are the business architects. We want to have everything around information because then we can design information better. And on the business side, they say, no, that's not our org structure. That's not how we organize. Yeah, they might have their boxes, and now the IT side have their boxes, and we have our boxes. We have the org chart and the teams and so on. And where we want to take it from business IT alignment, I don't like the term, because it's about business IT co-design. And with all of our work at Intersection Group, it is about a seamless business IT co-design. We want to bring in the skill of an architect, this cohesion, loose coupling, the thinking I showed you this day. We want to bring this into the world of organization design. They don't understand it. They run the technical universities. Right now, they don't understand it. They do it by gut feeling, organization design in hidden circles, driven by gut feeling, and they are clever people, but they don't apply architectural thinking and architectural stuff. And with Intersection Group, we want to move from business IT alignment to true business IT co-design. We want to open co-design spaces. We want to invite the people, and we want to have the domain-driven design software architect, for example, bring him into the room with the organization, the people doing the organization design. Right now, domain-driven design, for example, they are quite desperate because they have their domains, and business people don't use these domains. But so that's all a bit puzzled. We believe the only way to get out of this drama is to enable a true business IT co-design. That's maybe one of the mission of our association. Yeah, and so how do you elicit? I like this word elicitation. It's coming from requirements engineering. So it's about how to gather information to design your capability model. How to do that? You have a new assignment. So what I usually do? And what I usually do is I explore existing wisdom. So I look at the org chart. That's a good input. And quite often you will have human resources, you will have billing and so on. And these are capabilities. That's one input. And then when you read the org chart and you get more and more understanding of the domain of the business, you will find flaws in the organizational structure. You will find teams that don't belong together. That's where your your analytical thinking comes into play. And then you can then you have friction. Then you start drawing your capability model on a sheet of paper. Yeah. So just write down a few boxes. That's for your understanding. And then you find the friction between the ideal capability model, driven by cohesion, what belongs together and so on, and the org chart. And then there's always conflict, a lot of conflict, because what you do, you unveil existing political problems, and the org chart is never clean. Your capability model should be as clean as possible. Now you have a problem. You have some tension, and it takes 1 year, 2 years until you maybe have a position, if you're in a coaching role, to facilitate a discussion with executives and business people to start reorganization. So I've had this only once in my career, but that was an exciting moment when I came up with a capability model, and I talked to the head of the business unit, and I said, well, your org chart is now so. My model would say it's better that way because things belong together, and these two departments are making 70% the same things. It took me 1 year to understand it because you need to understand the business a lot to do that. And what he did, he reorganized. So it is possible to trigger a reorganization based on sound business architecture work, and that's where we want to go, right? And typically what you also have in companies are existing process models, product models. There's a lot of wisdom in there, and you have the terms, but again, they are far from perfect. I've never seen a really excellent process model. They're quite often outdated, but as first input, it's perfect. And once you have this, you draw your model on paper for yourself, and then you talk to a small group of, I call them seasoned outliers. Yeah, so business experts, seasoned experts that know what's really happening in this company. And I put a empty sheet of paper, and we draw on pencil, and they say, no, that's a problem. And then they complain about the org structure, and yeah, this department, and that department. And then I ask, okay, how should it be? And then we draw, and then only in this small group of people. And then often I talk to application owners, because in IT applications, you find a lot of business functionality. And you find a lot of terms if you browse the user interfaces. And if you look which information is stored in these systems and so on, that's always also good information about what's really going on in this company. And it takes some months, half a year, I don't know, 9 months or so, until I dare to talk to executives. Because then it gets political, right? So typically it's easy to have some friendly experts and you drink a coffee with them. That's easy. And yeah, help me a bit with the thinking. And then you build coalitions, also a pattern in our book. And so take your time until you go to the B-level executives, because they don't usually like this change. They don't like this transparency. And that's why you need the big friends here, because they're only people that are interested in transparency and in a clean capability model, in clear accountabilities, and well-designed organizations are the people on top, because usually one layer down, they have some benefits because of these intransparencies. They want to keep their power, probably. They have a team of 200 people, and now you suggest, no, you should only have 50 problems. So you need to have, of course, the big friends there. Okay, so, and that's the summary. What you've learned today: derive capabilities from existing material. Organizational chart and processes are a good starting point. Product, much what I've said recently. Use decomposition criteria intentionally for highest cohesion. Always use this mindset, what belongs together most. The example, building tracks belongs together, and building wires, so the electricity of this railway, belongs together because of this very different skill set and very different machines you need. That's pretty straightforward. So always ask yourself, what's the criteria that has this highest cohesion and defines this boundary in the best possible way. Select categories with care. I presented some today, so discussion is not finished, but be aware that maybe this good old management, core, and support might be a bit outdated. I don't like this management category. It's on top, but management is not that important. It's just that managers maybe wanted to have this process model. It's for them. They are only on top. So I don't like that. But however, layout for beauty. Beauty is the glue between disciplines. Run a broad elicitation process. Yeah, and this final wording here is business IT co-design. And there are a lot of tools to come up end of this year in the intersection toolkit. About that, more to come. Yeah, so next week there will be a webinar about the Milky Way map. So the Annika and Milan, they will discuss how to connect capabilities with the red and the green facet. How to connect them to processes, how to connect them to purpose and to user experiences, to customer journeys. Today we didn't talk a lot about customer journeys. Today we were only in the blue facet, architecture capabilities. But how is it connected to the why, to the green facet, and to the customer experience? That's next week. And the week after next week, it's me again. So we will talk about the strategic part, goal portfolio management. How can we connect goals to a capability map, for example? How can we design goals to manage the direction of the company? So this is the executive part. So if you're interested in more the strategic management part, so be there in 2 weeks from now. You can register at our events page. And then only 2 minutes left before the Q&A. I just wanted a few words about Intersection Group. We have around 700 members on Slack, 80 full members, around 5,000 newsletter subscribers. And what we're really proud of is that we have this diverse group of people. So we are not only driven by a business architect's mindset, we are also driven by this designer mindset. So we have business designers, experience designers, service designers, and they are quite aliens sometimes to me. So we have this analytical and the people closer to design, and it's fascinating in our tools what happens in these discussions. And so if you're interested, send me a message and I can invite you to Slack. Then you're closer to this community. It's a vibrant group of people. We are really proud of them. Some authors are there of books I've presented today. So what we are gonna produce is this toolkit. By end of this year, there will be a first alpha version for members only. And there will be also a webinar on this toolkit. Community and events, we have these weekly webinars each Wednesday, and we have a conference, but this year it's cancelled due to Corona. Next year it will be in Stockholm in fall, the Intersection Conference. And we produce learning and knowledge, so there's also some courses available on our website already if you're interested. And there's a book, so that's the final advertisement. Of course, I need to do that, right? So if you're interested in our first publication, for us, this is quite fundamental. So what you find in this book is 35 patterns to radically increase your impact on the enterprise design patterns. And it starts from having your own private vision and how to gain impact, how to come up with clear ownership, how to enable safe negotiations, have a shared vision, how to co-create. So that's big for us. So this picture here with this co-creation aspects and so on. So we believe that's quite the foundation of our discipline. So that's the final advertisement, and I think we've done it. Yeah, and there are weekly webinars. So go to our events page. And now we have some questions. Let me see. Okay. Anonym, that's a good name. Is capability progression more demonstrable through the dimensions of capabilities being heat mapped? I like heat mapping. It's not part of today's webinar. It's part of the webinar in 2 weeks. Heat mapping is a very powerful tool, but yet if your capability map is weak, the heat map will be weak. So the capability map, of course, is the base for this heat mapping. And we have in 2 weeks, I will present some criteria you can use for heat mapping. Performance, for example, of a capability. Okay, and then we have the question by Mark, aren't those criteria part of the operating model? You mean the capability criteria probably? Yes, of course, it depends on the kind of the company. Yeah, but if you are in a private sector, you usually have customer touch points, you have operations, you have shared areas. So the question is, and we need to do some more research probably. Yeah, it depends on the industry. And if you're public, it might be different. That's true. But the bad thing is there's not much out there, not many patterns to be found that help you. Like this capability, but wonder if strategic activity needs to be called out separately. So the question is, what does it mean, strategic activity? I think strategic is a term that is widely used and a bit fussy quite often. So what we think, it's about change. We want to change what's going on, and in change, typically you have innovation and you have this R&D, enterprise designers, process people, and you have, of course, the people creating the vision and the strategy and the business model. So all of this stuff. So it's, I don't know if you mean this all by strategic activity, but we see this in this change category, and we are about to discover, and there will be some tools ready that deals with goal design, with making strategic decisions and so on. So this is a big topic also for Intersection Group and the upcoming toolkit. Shouldn't the language be formed as a workshop that has the business come up with the names, eher Geistesdingen, what now, not application, and so on? Well, yeah, I like workshops, but you must always be careful to invite the right people and have the right majority. So that's a science when to run a workshop. What I always suggest is to start small and read what you can read. It takes 1 month, 2 months before, and then you talk, and then you find allies maybe. Then look for the seasoned experts, and then you have an idea, you have a certain understanding and your first capability map only for yourself. You need to be prepared before you go to a big meeting. So I'm not a big friend to have a big meeting up front and everybody throws in their terms. Not a good idea. It's better the other way around, I think. Oh, somebody likes the icon idea. Yes, it's some effort, but hopefully we will have it in the toolkit. Okay. And then then we have the question. Okay, I need to close the Q&A here probably. Is it really co-design if you don't involve the top management until the end after several months? Oh, that's a good one. In my mind, this will be difficult if the mission to build a capability does not come from the top. Yes and no. Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's a challenge that must emerge bottom up and top down, and it has some strategic fit, of course. But my experience is that you must have really a sound understanding before you go to the boardroom. So if you start a new assignment, you might not know the domain, you don't have no clue about the terms. It takes a lot of time until you have a first draft. Yeah? And so keep it small until you have a sound understanding. And once you are able to present a draft of the map that is good enough for executive management, because the worst things that could happen is that you go into the boardroom, say, hey, I'm the cool capability map, and these guys are around for decades probably in this company. They know the business, and they say, oh, that's nice. You are here for 6 months now. I've been working here for 2 decades. That's not how we work, and then you're dead because you can not come back again. So that's the reason why I always recommend to start small with the seasoned experts and start building allies with this quite often frustrated older people. Yeah, and then you find your way through the organization. You build your allies and you build your coalitions you need for your effort. Okay, there's a question about TOGAF. Rainer Weiss asks, should one use the TOGAF meta model as basis for doing business architecture to connect the dots? So if you ask me, we want to come up with an alternative. We are honest. So by end of this year, we also have a model and the Agile language. It's almost ready. I have some concerns with some concepts of TOGAF and with the meta model. So I think still it's bloated and it's not beautiful. It's the opposite of beautiful. Or Archimate, for example. We have Mark Lankhorst also in our group, the inventor of Archimate. So there might also be a mapping. But what we think, and with Intersection Group, what we want to come up with is a beautiful toolkit. And we will only have 9 or 10 or 12 elements in our meta model. And that not only has architecture like TOGAF, but it also includes experience, the customer task, top task, and purpose, and so on. So I'm not the biggest TOGAF fan, to be honest. So then we have what is the level of detail you would want to have in your capability model? I tend to fall into the trap of wanting all blueprints tied together, but are increasingly wondering to what extent that is useful. Yeah, so I think I had a slide that says, okay, focus on the essence. So what I usually do is having 5 or 10 level 1, having 20 level 2, and maybe 50 or 70 level 3. So that's maybe good of a guidelines. So it's always, what is the purpose? What is it what you want to achieve? Right. And I want to achieve a shared understanding of the major things that go on. So it's maybe not important. So if I go back to my example here, it's maybe not so important to, where is it? maybe not so important to dive deeper into build and maintain tracks. For example, there's a lot going on. The people down there, they know what to do with tracks, and there are some security guidelines and educations and so on. But for this railway, for this map, for me, it was only important to say, hey, we are build and maintain tracks. And if you want to dive deeper, you can model a process and you can have a more detailed documentation that then is more for the operational level. But with capability, I think we want to be more on the higher strategic management level, right? All right. So I think we're running out of time. Thank you so much for your attention, and then most of you kept the attention until the finish. Hoping to see you next week. For example, next Wednesday is a webinar on Milky Way. Hoping to see you at some of our other events. So stay tuned on the Intersection Group's events page for other webinars, or send me a message on LinkedIn if you want to be part of our Slack community. Let's stay in touch, and I wish you all a nice evening on the other side of the world and a nice working day here in Europe. And at the end, of course, we can continue some awesome Pink Floyd solos. So see you all. Bye.